In today's video, I'm going to be building a no expenses spared 4K gaming PC build, combining some truly incredible PC components that cost a lot of money to build an epic high-end system for gaming, but also high multi-core tasks like video editing and rendering. But is there ever a reason that anyone should spend this much money on a gaming PC? I guess that is what we'll be finding out today. Let's do this. The Corsair Frame 4000D is here and better than ever. With a spacious and fully modular design, you can configure this case to meet your build's exact needs. Improved airflow at the front and on the side helps to keep temperatures down, while Corsair's new InfiniRail mounting system allows you to adjust fan rails for added versatility and a cleaner aesthetic. What's more, it's compatible with reverse connector motherboards, 360mm all-in-one radiators, and comes with an integrated GPU anti-sag arm. Learn more and check it out at the first links in the description below. I'm going to start off by talking through some of the absolutely ridiculous PC components that make this build possible, starting off of course with the CPU. Now this is AMD's latest Ryzen 9 9950X3D, and in our launch build where we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, you can see just what makes it so special. It's got 16 cores, 32 threads, a staggering 144 megabytes of L3 cache, and offers up ridiculous gaming and also ridiculous productivity performance. Whether you're playing Black Ops 6 and Apex Legends at stupid high frame rates where you're likely to find a CPU bottleneck, or doing video editing or rendering, this is about as good as it gets. It's also AMD's most expensive desktop CPU right now, meaning it fits the bill for today's frankly ridiculous build perfectly. Now I'll be pairing this up with one monster of a GPU because a base, reference 5090 design obviously wasn't expensive enough. This is the MSI Supreme. Now, short of stepping up to the Supreme Liquid, which is obviously even more insane, this is about as good as you're gonna get when it comes to a 5090 GPU. One thing I find absolutely hilarious about this graphics card is the fact that it comes with a 4-way adapter. So if you've not got a PCI Gen 5 cable, you've got 4 8-pins. Please don't ever use this. Just get yourself a power supply with the right connector and wattage, especially for a 5090. But boy, is this thing nuts. I think it might be the heaviest graphics card I've ever used. I'm not even joking, it's so heavy. So you get full metal construction on the front with these 3 large fans. You get really nice sleek Supreme branding. Flick round here and you get a full length heatsink to of course keep the 5090 cool. Around the back we've got a bit of through airflow on this side, but none on the back here where the backplate is. Presumably MSI are channeling a lot of the air out the rear of the GPU. Now at 4K the 5090 is a complete monster. Out of all of the 50 series GPUs it was the most impressive, offering up 20 to 35% extra performance over the 4090, depending on the games you're going to play. And unlike some of the other 50 series cards, is actually a worthwhile replacement for the GPU that it, replaces. Of course, it's a very high-end card. There's no getting away from the fact that its MSRP is a lot of money and the current market pricing is even higher, but it's the best of the best, and that is what I'm looking for. Now, talking of the best, I want to talk about this. This is Samsung's latest Gen 5 NVMe drive. And to say that I was a little tired of using their 990 Pro in builds would be an understatement. It is a great drive, but I was waiting for Samsung to bring out something that bit better, and this fits the bill perfectly. It's going to give you up to 15 gigabytes per second on those read speeds, which is nuts, and this 4TB drive gives us loads of capacity too. Working up the parts list a little bit further, and I've picked up this memory from G.Skill, which I've used I think only once before, the DDR5 version, and this is a 48 gigabyte 7200 mega transfer kit of their Trident Z Royal. Look at that. Now, not only is it hyper reflective, it's got this really good looking like crystal design on the top, which is just going to be magical once it's installed. And I'm hoping actually tie in with a few of the silver accents on today's build, like the graphics card, which isn't fully black by design. The motherboard also feeds into the theme of overkill for today's build, and I'm actually excited to check out this, the MSI X870 Godlike. And I haven't used a Godlike motherboard from MSI. I think in a couple of generations. I don't think I ever looked at their X670 Godlike. Obviously, this is AMD's highest end chipset. So it's going to give us the maximum performance. And MSI give you it in this rather nice box, which unfortunately for me appears to be sort of falling apart a little bit. However, if we get the board out, which let's face it is the important bit, it is absolutely unbelievable. Stuff like this just makes me so happy to see a brand just go literally all out. So for example, you've got fully toolless M.2 heatsink covers all the way down the board, which I can easily demonstrate. You've got loads of Gen 5 NVMe slots, as well as, of course, Gen 5 PCIe as standard. MSI have moved all of the connectors onto the side, so you haven't got any at the bottom. So you've got USB 3s, you've got your fan headers, your JFP, you've got an extra 8-pin power. On the top of the motherboard, we've actually got a screen with some corresponding buttons, which is pretty exciting. The back of the board is fully covered in metal, so that's going to protect the rear PCB, of which, of course, this is one dense PC board on this motherboard. The I/O is also pretty nuts, with a 5 gigabit and a 10 gigabit RJ45 port, more USB 4 than you can shake a stick at. And if you were actually going to be building a system for high-end like video editing, rendering, streaming, you needed all the connectivity, you don't need to spend this much money to get it, but if you do spend this much money, you will get it. So that's something. Other parts to talk about, I've got this from Lee & Lee. This is their HydroShift LCD 360, and I'll be replacing the fans on this and in the rest of the build with more wireless things that aren't actually wireless, with the Unifan SL wireless. I've got some LCD, some normal versions. Again, it's the same principle that applies. You just plug power in and then actually you control the RGB on the fans wirelessly. I think that's pretty much it for the parts. Just the case to talk about. I've gone ahead and picked up Phanteks NV5 for this build. Why? It's one of my favorites, and it's also not too big. I really like some of the large chassis like the Hype Y70 Touch and Haven's HS420, but sometimes I don't want to build enormous PCs. We can have lots of power while still retaining the ATX eATX form factor. And with that being said, probably time to build a gaming PC. So I'm going to start things off with the motherboard and get in as much in here as possible. It really is amazing to see what AMD have done with their Ryzen lineup, and the 9950X3D is just one of those CPUs that show that AMD can just do it all nowadays, which is really, really fantastic to see. The RAM in this build as well, really, really excited. I'm hoping it doesn't kind of color clash too much and that it matches okay. Obviously, I'll be using the 2nd and 4th RAM DIMMs in this system, which does give a couple of extra DIMMs spare, so that if you wanted to upgrade to, say, 96 gigabytes of memory, you could do just that. SSD installation in this board is exactly as you might expect, super easy. You just need to remember to remove the little thermal pad off both the bottom of the SSD mount and also the thermal pad on the bottom of the top cover, which is actually going to slot onto the SSD itself. With the motherboard assembly complete, it's time for the case. Now, I'm not sure if officially the Phanteks NV5 actually supports extended ATX motherboards, which is what this is. However, I have checked and it fits absolutely fine. There's no jeopardy, I'm afraid. There's no bad decision making here. We should be all good. What's quite good is that because these grommets are actually on a corner angle, even if it blocks the front, we'll still be able to run the cables through the side. Just be careful if you are copying this build at home, because the board is really, really heavy. Unbelievably heavy. It should rest on all of those standoffs just fine. And you can see it's a big boy. 3 screws at the top, 3 along the middle and 3 down the bottom. At the moment, you can't really see any of them, and that's because they actually have these little trim pieces on. So you need to take the trim bits off, and that will then reveal where your motherboard screw hole locations are. So we've got one there, one there, one there, and of course another 3 along the middle, and a further 3 at the top too. Now that that's in, I'm gonna do the CPU cooler next. Typically, you might want to do the power supply at this stage, but with pretty much all of the power cables on this board down the side, apart from the CPU, the cooler's actually not gonna get in the way of anything. I picked Lee & Lee's HydroShift because it's just a bit different. And I think that in the CPU cooler space, there has been, relatively speaking, a bit of a lack of innovation. The Lee & Lee HydroShift looks to remedy that in a few interesting ways. Now, what it does is actually has a little channel for the tubes of the cooler situated at the back. And providing you've got enough clearance in your case, I hope we do, what it means is that the run to the CPU can actually look a lot more clean, because the tubes just pop out where the CPU is and actually aren't hanging loose in your system, making everything everything a bit more tidy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I am going to swap out some of the pre-installed fans with their SR wireless, just so the whole build matches a little better before installing the cooler at the top of the case, with the fans, of course, exhausting out of the chassis. Getting the cooler in this build was a fairly involved process. I had to take off the original fans and reseat our new SR wireless, which looked really, really good. It's so clean, with the tubes looking like they just pop out the back of the radiator down onto the actual processor. There are a few brackets and bits you need to install for this Lian Li cooler, but follow the manual and it's actually fairly simple. While on the subject of cooling, I have got some more fans to put in. 4 reverse blades, so 3 at the side and 1 reverse blade on the bottom. They're all going to act as intake, as well as a 120mm standard in exhaust at the back, which can only mean one thing. It's time for a fantage, or like fan montage. Do you get it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I won't do that again. Now then, it's power supply time, and this is another ridiculous component in this build. It's the MSI MEG AI1600T PCI 5. Basically, it's a 1600-watt power supply. Oh my god, it's 80 plus titanium, cybernetics titanium, ATX 3.1 as well, so that's going to give us not only the Gen 5 cable, but all the new power standards too. Now, for the 5090, you don't need this much wattage, but obviously we have got a high-end CPU too, so it's better to be safe than sorry. And that is unbelievably heavy. Look at the rear panel though. We've got 2 of our 12-volt 2x6 connectors. Unbelievable. We've got the, obviously, motherboard ATX, loads of SATA, loads of the standard CPU, 4+4 pin and old school GPU, 6+2 pin power connectors. And in this, I think that's a velvet bag. That's the first ever velvet PSU cable bag I've ever used. You get, look at this, not only the Gen 5 connectors, but they're actually braided and they have cable combs on already. MSI, you're tickling me.
What?
We've got CPU cable that's also braided and it's got a cable comb. You're going to need a pair of CPU power connectors, so we've got 2 4+4 pins there. You're also going to need your GPU power cable with these nice little yellow ends. That's how you can tell it's all the way in. You probably will want a SATA power connection. That's obviously for any RGB hubs or old school hard drives. We will need an old school PCI actually, because our motherboard does have an 8-pin auxiliary connection just to give everything a bit more power. And then finally, 2 more. So we've got the motherboard power connection, which again is braided and has these nice cable combs on, and this USB-C cable. This goes to your internal USB 2 header, and that's going to allow us to do things like power monitoring within Windows. So an absolutely unbelievable unit on many levels. Very premium. I'll link this and everything else down below if you dare take a look at picking some of this stuff up for yourself. Once all the cables are in, it's time to slide this fairly enormous unit into place. It does fit in the MV5. It's just rather big and rather heavy. And I'm then going to wire up everything, which in this build is really easy, because pretty much all the cables and connections you need are all on the singular side. There's nothing here on the bottom and nothing on the top apart from the CPU power. And with the power supply in, I can finally install the GPU. Looking at the existing PCI lanes, there are 2 missing at the top. That's from when I've used this case in a previous build, which you can check out in the cards now. However, in this system, that's not quite the right config, as what I need is the 2nd and 3rd lanes for what is actually a 3.5 slot GPU. It just only screws into 2 of said lanes. So I'm going to move slot number 3 all the way up to slot numero 1, and then slide the beast, the Supreme, into place. Are we ready? Is the PCI lane unlocked? I actually don't know. Where's the button? Slide that into place. A bit of pressure. That is absolutely enormous. And with a couple of screws into place, we have ourselves a gaming PC build. Now, it's not sagging too much actually, which is good. MSI do include this little anti-sag bracket, but it's actually going to be too big for the build today. It's not actually going to fit without damaging the GPU or pushing it too much the other way. A power cable into the graphics card, and this build is ready to go. So the build looks amazing, but how well does it perform? Well, to test this system out, I've used MSI's 272 URX, a stunning QD OLED panel with a 240Hz refresh rate, nearly 100 watts of power delivery over USB-C, and a gorgeous QD OLED panel. It worked great for all the 4K benchmarking I did in today's build, and you can see a summary of the results that we gathered on your screen now. A closer look at some of these results paints a really promising picture. Hogwarts Legacy, for example, at 4K high, yields an average of 227 frames per second on average. Pretty nuts. While Apex Legends at 4K high pretty much caps out at the game's near 300 FPS limit, while Marvel's Rivals, which is a game I know a lot of you guys are playing right now, performs really well too. 4K high, just shy of 140 FPS on average. All in all, this is a build that provides top tier performance and really looks amazing. Yes, it's going to cost a small fortune, but wow, the results are pretty incredible. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.